Allora, buongiorno a tutti. Mi sentite? No? No. Ora mi sentite meglio? Allora, grazie di essere qui oggi.
Thank you for being here today. Perhaps I can take off the mask to talk about of the birth of this restoration work that we are completing. This is a work in progress. We are applying the last touch-ups for the premiere screening at the Lunetta and then Sunday on Arena del Sole. This restoration is quite dear to our hearts. For certain reasons I will explain to you. About 10 years ago, we presented during an edition of Cinema Ritrovato, 2010 to be more exact, a program on Naples and silent cinema. So we looked at great collections and documents and cinema and films about a story, a history that was particularly important in our silent cinema that was developed starting from the beginning of cinema up down to the 1920s in Naples and its areas. It is quite localized. The main collection, and I mentioned that because it's really rich, is Vittorio Martinelli's collection. You all know him. If you deal with silent cinema, he's well known. One of the most important scholars, together with Aldo Bernardini, one of the pioneers of the history and critique of Italian silent movies. And he's also in love with his origin. So he was from Naples, so he has a great collection. Starting from that, we started thinking about the power and main features of this national film collection. So at that time we started to reason about what we could do, and then preparing a series of programs illustrating the different features of Neapolitan silent cinema. We presented this film, My Cousin, Enrico Caruso, a protagonist, 1918, US production. And we organized a small exhibition, small but important. And we have to thank Professor Giuliana Muscio, who's here with us. And I will ask her to speak and to explain a bit and how to put into context this story. One of the most interesting points of this retrospective, leading us directly to Caruso, is found within the concept Naples as a synecdoche. So, a figure of speech linking one portion to the entire element. So Naples, late 19th, early 20th century, represented Italy. The image of Italian people was strictly linked, and perhaps is still so today, to the main trait of being from Naples, so the Neapolitan trait. And this phenomenon grew exponentially when we talk about the year of the migrations from Italy to the US. And this type of phenomenon was the starting point of a cultural stigmas placed on Italian people. So this movie by Caruso tells us a feature which is extremely important. At that time, we had found a surprise. After looking for the print, the last moment we realized that this print did not come to Bologna. It happens often there was a mishap. So we screened a DVD. 10 years later, well, we found all the elements of this film, and at last we restored the print, a quite complex restoration efforts, 11 years. So we didn't work solely on that, but that was a long way. I would just like to tell you briefly why we decided to do that this year. This year, we celebrate the 100 years from the death of Caruso, dying the 2nd of August 1921, and so we felt to commemorate this centennial. Caruso moved from Naples after a long career in 1903, and he became the epitome of the Italian in US. So a character extremely popular, and you will see how he acquired this fame. And we're keeping up the traits of the Italian character features, so liveliness, passion, nostalgia, the sincerity of feelings. Then you go back to the immigration. And this is found in his musical repertory. He was the main tenor, no? But he kept throughout his career a more classic repertory, the repertory of the street singer that you would find in Naples. So the traveling singers going from restaurant to restaurant. So this, we see the growing of the character Enrico Caruso, and he had this adventure linked to
riesce a cavalcare
to the music recording. He was a pioneer in using this technology that was created in late 19th century, the phonograph and gramophone, but he made the first recording in music that completely changed the musical realm. De facto, in 1902, by the recording were made in Milan and then in the US. So by recording his voice and his first opera arias through the gramophone, he would bring to in the homes of everyone the possibility of listening to opera arias or pieces, which were considered high culture. So there was really a turning point then, and Giuliana Muscio wrote, so he became the first media star in history. And he's a genius in that, and really exploiting the new technology of musical recording. He sold many records, so he was very popular, even more than before. And he becomes a household name. So he participated in many experiments combining the image and the sound. And then we get to 1918, when he participated in his first movie, actually, My Cousin, Enrico Caruso. He signs with Lasky Corporation a contract for 2 movies. Very lucrative contract to produce 2 movies in the same year, before My Cousin and then My Splendid Romance. The story of this film is still blurred, considering that this film was supposed to be an epoch-making success, because there was a lot of money being invested, so the cinema got an enormously popular star, considering that the opera movies were becoming very important. So cinema had won over Enrico Caruso, but something happened. This movie, which it was written and directed by cinema professionals in the US, is not an opera movie. So they write a story where, yes, the protagonist is old. There are two protagonists, two cousins. One of them is essentially Enrico Caruso, a great tenor. Is doesn't have the name Enrico Caruso, but he's a great tenor. We are in New York, Little Italy, everything comes back. And then the cousin, the poor cousin, that he loves, worships this tenor cousin, and he doesn't see him, hasn't seen him for many years, and then there is a love story. Opera is there, but it's not an opera movie, so there is only one scene taking place inside an opera house, where the cousin sings. So then there are many elements drawing us back to the real character, Caruso himself. So, but it's not an opera movie. But the audience was expecting and having Enrico Caruso singing. The time, the film was silent, but something strange happened. Then hearing Caruso singing. And something else happens. Probably there is a row, something bad going on, a difference between Laschi, the producer, and Enrico Caruso on the outlining of the main character, the tenor and the cousin. So, meaning that there is something which is linked to the Italian traits, how the main characters are treated. So what happens? The movie is broadcast somewhat for a release 20 October 1918, but the fact there is a break, an interruption due to the Spanish flu. That probably was an excuse. And the film was released a month later, the 17th of November, from the 20th of October to the 17th of November. So there is advertisement, there is lots of material from the time, original ones. And in these materials you find the name of the character, which are different, and there are differences in the plot as well, besides the changing of names. So we probably think that there was some reshooting certain scenes, or a change, a turning point. The materials, and I will show you some picture of it, with different names. The protagonists change names 3 or 4 times. And you cannot find a reason for it. Then, of all these promotional materials, we find also this novelization, or where the plot is described quite specifically by telling in details the plots, and with dialogue and exchanges, where this characterization of the Italian American is very present. With somewhat also racist, so the trait of sympathy or the popular traits are turned often into racist remarks, and also the black hands is mentioned. So the Italian traits are not looked positively, and probably Caruso did not expect that. because he worked in a totally different direction, so spaghetti eaters, so the very racist picturing of Italian Americans or American Italians, and also the woman as well, that the poor cousin is in love with, Rosa. And you can see that also from the still shots. There are many photos that are found at the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and there are still shots. And we know that they were not included in the movie. So they're very strong scene, violent scene, as you can see. So then there is a fight. So, well, the very temperamental character of the poor cousin ends up in really drawing blood. The fact, actually, the film was a flop. So Lasky states it clearly, but he has to pay back the exhibitors. The second movie either is not released, maybe just is released and then drawn back. And my cousin has a distribution, a slight distribution, but also abroad. And this is of help for us, because then we have actually, as a main element for the restoration, a Swedish print with the Swedish subtitles, and then we will, Rosa will tell us more about the restoration elements, but what we have is not a US print, but a Swedish print. Before getting into details about the restoration elements, I would like to give the floor to Giuliana Muscio. I don't know, is there a microphone for Giuliana? Yes.
Sì, durante tutta questa...
During this very difficult, painstaking reconstruction of the history of cinema, we had to face when Caruso seemed to have had a good time in shooting the film, in acting. Guglielmo Ricciardi is there, one of the main Neapolitan actors working in the silent American cinema with a very interesting career. But also Cesare Gravina is one of the tribe that trained Caruso for an actor, training Caruso for the film. It seems that Caruso, this went well. So the 18th of August, Caruso decided all of a sudden to marry Dorothy Benjamin, who is a high society girl. And something seems to change all of a sudden in the story of the film, the history of the film. So some of the scenes were reshot, and so the violent scenes are eliminated by replaced in moments where Caruso is making faces against his rival. And then this. So also Caruso he was a bit of a comedian, and he could not do so in opera because operas are dramas, but just to make him show his comedic traits. I don't know what you know, the figurinai. There is to say the figurinai are, in Italian, are the makers of ciocches or little figurines in clay or plaster that you would find in many homes, and also that, you know, and that are very popular in Naples. So then he was making a bust of Caruso. in order to make more money. No? That was the cousin. And we found some still shots because those, you could see that mustache were added on the photography with ink, China ink. And this for an advertisement, for a promotion. Also, Lansky paid $100,000 only for Caruso. And it was not... And it was shot at Manhattan Theater. It was a very expensive movie with lots of extras, mass scenes, and the fact that there is a promotional campaign that is so bad, really, it means that something went wrong and something was stopped. So the last time we talked with Elena in order to clarify one of the mysteries, which seemed very stupid and difficult to rationalize, is that in the movie Tommaso, the name of this character in the most distributed, most circulated version of the film, Tommaso is written with two S, Tommaso, and Guglielmo Ricciardo is accredited as Joseph Ricciardi. Keep in mind that nobody had studied this material, so that the Catalogue of American Film Institutes writes in these errors using the wrong names of the characters. So at this point, one may ask, so is Ricciardi one of the best friends of Caruso? And so they did slapsticks on the stage. So there are several caricatures that Ricciardi makes of Ricciardi. It's impossible that these, these credits were given so mistaken. And considering that everything coincides with the wedding date of Caruso, and these strange photos with the mustache in China ink, and also in the Peabody catalog there are different numbers considered late and after Splendid Romance, because the two movies were so negative, both of the portrait of Caruso and also he is a Lothario in Magnificent, in the second film, and so these are really stereotype of Italian American. So in the 18th of August, Caruso elopes with Dorothy. They decide to marry, and her parents were not happy. In Dorothy's biography, and I looked at it because a bit desperate, because we didn't know how to explain that, of the fact that it was really a flop, and that Caruso never said anything, that the film is never made in his biographies, and that there is no article telling about the first screening, the premiere of the film. I was dumbfounded. So in the biography, her biography, Dorothy tells her first engagement with Caruso, when he asked her to get married. So I went to my father right away. He didn't want to listen to me. He refused to see Enrico or to give a consent to our engagement. And so there were 22 years of difference from, he was 22 years older than me, and his life could not be shared, that he would be devout to opera and not to me. And he would have sacrificed me for his audiences. He insisted on the fact that the differences in tradition, but more exactly social classes. That Caruso came from a farmer's family, which is not true, while my ancestors, my father recalled me, came to the first pioneers of New York and New England. And they were gentlemen and ladies, aristocrats. None of these argumentation was strong enough to shake my love for Enrico. So she decided to get married, and her father and her family disinherited her, and she never saw her family. And also there were different problems, and also there were differences, and she didn't want to give the money that Caruso had made with the recording to the previous, the son that Caruso had with another woman, and maybe that was due because she found herself suddenly disinherited and poor. She said, I was never in favor of having my husband getting into cinema. That's my opinion, and this was shared by many of Caruso's friends, that he was only a tenor, a singer, and as such, he should never change the image to the audiences. He didn't have the time. He was already a star of the opera. He was the best. But he had a great time. He wanted to do something new, and he was interested, and this is important to underline. He wanted to learn the techniques, the art of cinema production. Caruso was a bit obsessed with media technologies. He was really interested, and the way you can use them and exploit them. Besides being amusement that derived from that, he was offered an astronomical figure, $200,000 for 6 weeks of work, and that was really, he could not refuse that. It was too much. At this point, we can say something negative about this woman. So she probably stopped the circulation of these movies. In Splendid Romance, there was a depiction of this American singer who convinced the Prince Cosimo to move to America and saved his life, but he betrayed her. He had a secret wife. So it was really a complicated story that probably portrayed the complicated life of Caruso. Perhaps she was the one that blocked the dissemination, the circulation of the movies, and perhaps Caruso let this go. The film actually disappeared, and we do not understand how many screenings there were and what happened really to the movies. But the difficulties in finding it shows how that its disappearance was true. And when there is something gone wrong and bad, and probably is also racism against Italians, Caruso had fought against it and defeated that bias against the Italians, but that remained. Caruso died in Sacco Vanzetti's year of that trial. So the anarchists, the bombing, and Italians were still considered anarchists, terrorist bomb throwers, let's say, and dangerous people. Thank you, Giuliana. This gives us a testimony of how much cinema is useful in tell us something about our origins and to place that into context and to remind us of how we were, we were people of immigrants, and as it happened, we should always remember that when we think about the present and the future. Now I give the floor to Céline, and we get into details about the element of restoration.
Sente? Sì, ok. Buongiorno a tutti.
My name is Céline Pozzi, and a project manager for Imaginary Ritrovata. I would like to illustrate to you the elements that we used for this restoration. First of all, the restoration was made starting from this internegative that we received by MoMA. This internegative was printed in 1976, starting from a nitrate print of the Vesca Institute that MoMA received in a cultural exchange of prints from film archives. So in this print, we have the Swedish subtitles that we used as a reference point for the reconstruction of the English subtitles that you will find in the restoration print. So this operation was supported by the fact that Elena found the censorship visa, Swedish, with a list of subtitles that corresponds to this internegative that we found, and so we deduced that the film was complete in the 1919. This is the version of the censorship visa. From the point of view of materials, an internegative, a second generation, let's say, it's not possible to identify 100% that, but as a physical good condition, this print, because it was not used very much, but there are duplicates, in duplicates, all the defects, the blames, scratches, points, and principle of qualification, and also breaks, ruptures and splices. Also in the film there's only one break. So the majority of the defects that you're going to see are being photographed. And
difetti più difficili da eliminare e da attenuare, però la qualità
so the quality, photographic quality,
bella, diciamo, rispetto all'elemento. Questo poi lo potrete.
So this you can appreciate it in a screening. Starting from this print, so the MoMA had in bioacetate print 1944, and the reels had the vinegar syndromes. And then Katie Trainer of the MoMA told us that from the dupe negative and the negative intertitle, there were several prints being developed with 16 millimeter that were used for transfer on video, for a video, and others were required or asked by several institutions. Probably these prints in 16 millimeters were at the origin of some of the other fragments that we found again. So the negative intertitles is the one that we have 5 reels movie, and the research enabled us to assess some fragments. Some of these fragments were one entire reel, the other ones other the reels and scenes that were edited in a different way. Probably these were fragments that were used as historical documentation of the film or for studying the film. Among these fragments, the most interesting one are those from the British Film Institute. And this is, fourth generation dupe negative with English subtitles. And the BFI told us that these fragments come probably from a copy that they received in 1960s from MoMA, and they developed another dupe negative, and then they gave it back to the MoMA. In this fragment, you will find a title that says that is an extract of the film. Also, we received another contribution, a fragment, 35 millimeter. Probably the curator told us that this was blown or developed from 16 into a 35 millimeter, but we don't know how the source, the original source of this fragment. Of course, this makes us understand that these fragments in terms of photography were not very interesting, so we remain on the dupe negative. But we know, or internegative, but we know that they were quite useful in tracing the back history of the film. Institutions trying to recover them, there were exchanges of prints, and all this enabled us to really keep alive the film. The last fragment we received is the one of the Gosfilm Fund. They sent us a scan of 70 meters of fragment with an intertitle of Film Archive, but that's not a surprise. Being Gosfilm Fund, you find all the films that were requisitioned at the end of the Second World War. This is a dupe negative, and there are scenes that are very important. That is to say, the introduction of characters in Caruso, where we see Caruso in its interpretation of opera singers, opera characters, and also other frames pertaining to the stage scenes. So if we compare these elements, we did not find relevant differences making us convinced to use these elements. Of course, some of the frames are longer or shorter, but as a principle for the restoration, unless you make a particular critical edition, we follow aesthetics. So we have an element complete, good quality and consistent with a good photographic layout, then we use that instead of making integration with low quality materials. Also, in this dupe negative, there are parts with burned whites and very dark black, corresponding to the scene, most famous scenes, such as the opera scene. So, considering that in that stage of this negative, so it was necessary to replace these scenes, considering that they were mainly used. So there was an extra generation on top. Now I would like to show you some files, these low resolution files, showing you these elements. And so now let us, the third.
E nella clip 4 ci sono poi l'elemento dell'eye, del Gosfilm Fund, e alla fine il controtipo negativo che abbiamo.
Vado, buono.
Di questo unico rullo abbiamo utilizzato appunto le didattiche.
Of this reel we use the intertitles because, as we said before, from
possibilità di utilizzare
So we could not use the English intertitles. The only reel with the English intertitles is number 5. So number 5 was used for intertitles, and for the rest we have translated them from Swedish. And you see the German title. These are all elements coming from the same source, and if we make a genealogy of the defects, we can see that they have very many defects in common. As concerns the names of the characters, we made a choice. As we told you before, the names of the characters have changed very many times, both in the paper documents as well as the advertising, as well as in the films. So we have decided to use as a main reference point the only reel with English intertitles. So the two protagonists are called Tommaso, correctly written in Italian, and the tenor is called Caroli. In the Swedish version, the tenor Caroli was called Caruso. So probably this was an advertising choice. They decided to maintain the name Enrico Caruso.
Questo è il frammento del Ghost Film Fund.
This is the fragment of the Ghost Film Fund.
Ecco, questa è l'unica scena dopo.
This is the only opera scene where we see Caruso exhibiting in the Pagliacci. And then this presentation is used, and we understand how much confusion there is between the real Caruso and the character of the tenor Caroli.
Ovviamente stiamo guardando una copia di lavoro.
Obviously, we are looking at working print, so to see it in its original version, you have to come and see the screening. All these are reference files made by the proxies for the scanning. Whereas this is the negative dupe of MoMA that we have used. That has a quality in the photography that is excellent, though low resolution. From the restoration point of view, when we carry out restorations for archives with these type of materials, we try to stick to a low profile. So we have carried out the stabilization, and then we work on the light pumping of the image, because this allows dot, 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 and then I show another clip. And then we do a basic cleaning and try to eliminate the larger spots or halos that may be present at the center of the image, just to improve the viewing. You see the draft of the translated intertitles, because the choice we have made was to use as reference. This was an obliged choice, but our reference point were the Swedish intertitles, and we had them translated into English. This is a pity in the sense that the intertitle is a very important element in this film, because this allows us to understand the shades of this traiting of the figure of the Italian-American character. Actually, you are going to be finding from roll 1 to 4 a neutral version English, whereas the real 5 was the only one where we found the English, has a connotation of Italian-American slang that is more peculiar. I will give you an example. There is a part in Little Italy, and in Italy that is called party. In the original version, it's called fiesta. Fiesta makes us think on how it was used, how Italian of the Italian-American was joined very closely to the Spanish language. In fact, the character of the Italian-American in American cinematography of the time was often interpreted by Spanish or Latin actors, not Italian actors, and vice versa. So there was quite fluidity. So we have finished with the clips, and the 2 clips you have seen are the 2 scenes of the de-doubling of Caruso. As the professor just said, this was a production that was extremely costly, so the effects are quite relevant and important for the time. But this type of technology was mastered very well in those years. And you see a very slight disalignment at the level of the piano and the small seat. And so they were shot with a double superimpression, showing a part of the room at the level where the shooting, but it's rather, it's irrelevant practically. And then the image is moving, so the end result and the attention is not drawn by these small difference. So this was a type of project and budget that was devoted to this film. Our time is over, and I just wanted to tell you something important, also linked to restoration. The work we have done on music. There are different timely materials where they talk about musical suggestions, and in no case we have found references to singing presence of Caruso. So there are elements of compilation and underground lines of Italian music. There is this piece that called My Cousin Caruso, which is a song that is prior, because it dates back to 1909, and the film was of 1918. So we found a note of the director, Edward José, that this song was a reference point for the film, and it's a playful and good and loving reference to the personality and the popularity of Caruso. And the text was interesting because this plays around the qualities of Caruso as an Italian-American. Now, for the restoration, we have wondered on what could be the best choice to make. musical choice, because there is big literature on the possibility of synchronization of the only scene of the opera that we have partly seen today, and where Caruso interprets I Pagliacci, and specifically there is the air of Vesti la giubba. But we have read and reread many times that it was not possible to carry out a true synchronization, because the scene was not shot directly, so there was a problem of editing, and so we have worked on the speed of projection, and we have decided and understood, and luckily this comes back to the experience that at the time we had 18 shots a second, but the labial is not matching, is not synchronized. And Mr. Forlacchi, who attends our festivals, and he's an expert and the silent film festivals, well, this guy dealt with the music for this restored film, and as a matter of fact, we made a musical experiment that was rather interesting, and I invite you to come and see it. And we managed to carry out a slight synchronization, of course, through a sort of reelaboration, what we managed to succeed. And so you will see in Lunetta Arena or Arena del Son, Daniele Forlati at the piano, and François Laurent guitar, and you will hear the voice of Caruso in the opera scene, and you will be listening in closing this piece, My Cousin Caruso, which is a very funny and entertaining piece that was not meant for the film, but Daniele did decide not to insert it in the film, but as closing, let's say Woody Allen style. We thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.